Hi, everybody, and welcome to our first cocktail caucus of the convention. I hope you enjoyed the seafood towers and duck hush puppies. I wanted to say those names out loud. They were just. We're calling this session Striking a Balance, and we're going to talk about some of the issues vital to the future of this country, energy, and the environment. I want to just give you a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. We're on Twitter, of course, hashtag #TheAtlanticRNC. We also have an app that you can download. It's called the Atlantic Conventions HQ. You can search it in the App Store. And that'll give you every bit of information you could possibly want about what we're doing here this week. And we'd love to have you back every day that we're here. I want to say a special thanks before we begin to voteforenergy.org. It's a voter education project from our underwriter, the American Petroleum Institute. Thank you to the API for making this session possible and our presence here in Cleveland happen. With that, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce API's Executive Vice President for Government Affairs, Louis Finkel, here to say a few words. Louis?
Well, much thanks, Margaret. We have had a great partnership this election cycle and look forward to continuing it going forward. Let me just say a couple quick things. First, we're very pleased to sponsor this event, especially with Steve Clemons and Congressman Johnson and Congressman Cramer sharing their insights about energy. And for us at API and for the American and for our industry, energy really isn't about one party or one candidate, even though we're here for the Republican convention. Energy is our candidate, and we are pushing forward for a robust energy discussion during this election cycle that talks about our energy future and a pro-growth agenda that allows the United States to continue to be a global leader and a global superpower in the energy markets. You all have bookmarks around that have some facts on them, and if you haven't seen them, and it's ironic that they're back at the bar, there are fortune cookies that will give you a little bit about your energy future, which we thought was a cute little trick. So I'm not going to talk much longer. I'm going to turn it back to Margaret, who's going to introduce Steve and the panel. Much thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Louis. We're going to spend about a half an hour with our guests. And then we're going to have time for your questions at the end, so be thinking about that as the conversation rolls. After that, we're going to have more time to hang out with one another, have more cocktails. In a moment, we're going to be joined by Congressman Bill Johnson. He represents Ohio's 6th District. That's a little south of where we are here in Cleveland. He's an Air Force vet. He sits on the Energy and Commerce Committee and is a strong defender of Ohio's coal industry. First, it gives me great pleasure to introduce North Dakota Congressman Kevin Cramer. He's also a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. Before he was elected to Congress in 2012, he was a North Dakota's Public Service Commissioner and oversaw the state's energy industry. In fact, I just learned that he's also a soccer ref as well. And he said that helped him prepare for Congress, which maybe he'll talk a little bit about. Anyway, he's now advising the Trump campaign on energy issues, and he's here with my colleague, Washington editor-at-large, somewhere here, Steve Clemons. Take it away.
That was the Cramer entrance. You guys all saw Seinfeld, right? We needed to do something. It's afternoon. I actually didn't mean to trip. I meant to jump out and say, hey, greetings, everybody. Congressman, great to be with you. So I hear that you are Donald Trump's energy brain. That's what it says here.
Is that what it says?
Yeah, energy advisor. We call this, when you study Japanese politics, because Japanese politicians don't allegedly know anything, they have brains around them who get appointed and anointed. So you're Donald Trump's energy advisor.
I am one of many, I'm sure.
Yeah, but my sheet says you're it. So
Okay.
what do you think the frames are with the presumptive candidate of the Republican Party as he approaches this? And I want to ask this in a fair way, because a lot of people, and perhaps it's unfair, talk about energy and the environment as a zero-sum game between both. And just hearing his own plan, it got titled "More Fossil Fuels and Fewer Rules." Is that the frame that you have in energy and the frame that he's carrying on energy and the environment?
Well, I think those statements are accurate as far as they go. But I think if anybody that's listened honestly to Mr. Trump talk about energy policy and environmental policy, he also always includes while preserving our environment. In fact, I would submit to you that when it comes to the Western states especially, that many of my colleagues in the Western states feel like he might have too much of an environmental bent to him in some regards, especially as it comes to things like Western lands and whatnot. Now, he's sort of settled on a nice middle ground as it relates to federal lands and how to manage them. But so I would say that headline is pretty good as far as it goes. However, it leaves out the rest of the story. For example, and Representative Johnson will no doubt talk a lot about coal. North Dakota is also a major coal-producing state. But he never talks about coal when he's not talking about clean coal. He has an understanding that emissions reductions of all types, be they CO2 or particulate matter or NOx, SOx, mercury, that all of that doesn't preclude getting rid of coal. In fact, that it enhances coal, that coal can be part of the clean solution.
Now, I've heard what Donald Trump has said about NATO and that our relationship with NATO needs to be renegotiated. Where is he with something like COP21?
I don't know, but we all know where he is on Paris, right? Mr. Trump, it's interesting that you bring up NATO. And I've done some interviews today where I remind people that whether you're talking about the TPP or precursors like NAFTA, or you're talking about the UN or the nuclear treaty with Iran, or you're talking about OPEC and oil, that Mr. Trump has an America first attitude, right? That's his fundamental, that's the backstop to all of his policies. I think energy, when it comes to energy, it's the perfect context to apply energy policy is in the America first realm, especially in light of what's going on with the shale revolution in oil and gas, for example.
So let's talk about in North Dakota, and I've had the privilege, I think as you know, to talk to Senator John Hoeven. I'm going to tell you what's so interesting in talking to Kevin Cramer is Kevin Cramer is actually more powerful in North Dakota and supported by more people than either of the U.S. senators from North Dakota. There's Heidi Heitkamp, and you've got 2 senators and 1 congressman from the state. It's a very rare situation. So are they envious of you in your, name recognition?
I've just never understood why it took 2 of them to do my job, but, it's a more a matter of work ethic,
right.
I think.
So in Fargo, for instance, and I've talked to Senator Hoeven a number of times about Fargo, and you've had a boom town there, a lot of it dealing with shale. Oil prices plunge. You've got massive overdemand, a glut of oil in the world. What has that done to the shale revolution that people were trumpeting so much as being a complete game changer? Is it knocked on its back? Is shale still there? What is it doing with oil prices where they're at now?
Well, first of all, Fargo in the Red River Valley is in the hub of some of the richest agricultural production land in the world. North Dakota is very accustomed to the cycles of commodities and how it affects an economy. So we're well prepared for that. Now, I would say, the price of wheat doesn't swing quite as dramatically as the price of oil has recently. That said, we are culturally attuned to it. So even while we've seen this large drop, first of all, production has largely remained close to the same. We're at about 1.2 million barrels per day. We're now at just probably under 1.1 million barrels per day. So at our peak, we were not that far above where we are now. What's happened is the same thing that happens in agriculture. A lot of consolidation, a lot of efficiencies are found. There's some pain in that, obviously. There are, especially for the vendors and the service providers and whatnot and the entrepreneurs. But that's a normal part of a commodity cycle. So North Dakota still has more jobs available than we have people to take them. It's just that the price of rent isn't quite as bad as it is in Manhattan anymore. So it's much better. I'll tell you, the biggest challenge is the government itself, because the revenue to the state, based on an 11.5%, basically 11.5% extraction tax, that's what's taken the hardest hit. But that's the fault of a lot of one-time spending that our legislature had the opportunity to engage in. They just have to get used to a different
when you
normal.
look into the future and you say what the energy mix of the country looks like, President Obama and I would argue Hillary Clinton as well sort of have a much bigger footprint for renewables in that mix. What is you in the GOP,
Sure.
but what does your footprint for renewables look like as we tilt in the future?
Well, first of all, we advocate a true all-the-above energy policy, and by that I mean all the above and below, whereas they sort of think all the above means we ignore everything that's below.
So there's a different definition to all of the
I
above?
think there certainly seems to be to
So
me.
let's go
Sure.
deeper into that.
So, for example, I think it's pretty clear that fossil fuels are, absolutely out of favor with Democrats, and with regard to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. I mean, I don't know how you get much clearer than we're going to bankrupt coal companies. Electricity rates are going to necessarily skyrocket, and to double down, Hillary Clinton says we're going to put a lot of coal miners out of business. I mean, it's hard for me to improve on that clear articulation of their policies. What I advocate for, and what Mr. Trump and I have talked about, is again, getting back to, we all like cleaner air, cleaner water, cleaner land, but nobody likes their clean water more than the people who live in the place that drinks it, right? So a state's first regulatory regime, for example, makes sense. When it comes to renewables, we have a number of tax policies and different policies that favor one particular energy source over another. You can take the research and development budget of the Department of Energy and production tax credits and things like that. But we have some things that are coming up that are expiring. What I've advocated for is let's just let all of that expire, but let's spend this transition time finding a policy, and take the tax realm, for example. A tax policy that is technology neutral, that favors American energy in all of its forms, and let the market work. Let the free market work. So you don't punish wind over coal. You don't punish oil versus RFS, or using the RFS for corn-based ethanol, and so on, and vice versa. But rather find an equal tax treatment that rewards all forms of energy developed and produced in the United States of America, and then let the market decide which fuel source they like best.
Recently we took two advocates on different sides of a question and dealt with public education. So one was sort of a devout public school and public union advocate, and the other was a big-time charter school advocate. The two of them sort of had been spending the last decade taking slices out of each other. And we did this experiment to see if one could take on the views of the other and sort of look at the points of merit that the opponent's argument had, and we actually had them change places and do this. So if I were like, a major environmentalist in North Dakota, and what would you say in terms of a lot of the environmental, what do you think are the most legitimate things I have to say in terms of my concerns about the environments and the balance with energy?
Okay, I like the way you pose the question, and I might even change it slightly and say, whether I think it's legitimate or not, you do.
Right.
And I think that to have an honest discussion about this, we have to sort of honor one another's views, even if I don't think yours are legitimate. Because regardless of, for example, regardless of what you think about CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions, or even the reality of climate change.
You're one of those that worries about the reality of, you may not think it's...
I think that
That's right next to the part that you're the brain on energy.
Yeah, the 97%...
Climate change skeptic.
The 97% of the scientists who believe it's real don't all believe the exact same to the exact same level. Whose fault it is, how we're going to stop it, what's the consequence of it in 20, 50, 100 years from now. There's a wide range in that spectrum.
Right.
Realizing that, and realizing that Americans, first of all, that climate change isn't probably in their top 10 of top 20 issues of things to worry about, it is nonetheless, it has some momentum, if you will. That said, it's the solutions to climate change that are frightening to me. And so if I understand that, if I believe that with you, then let's talk about the solution. In other words, if a carbon-constrained future is what the goal is,
right,
then let's come up again with a technology-neutral
so you're willing
policy.
To play ball with me.
I'm willing to play ball with you, but let's not say, but we can't do it with coal. We can't do it with oil and gas. We can't do it with methane from, that's leaking from gas wells. Never mind that the tropical wetlands are emitting a lot more. We're not going to put diapers on cattle. Let's get real. And so let's at least, once we can sort of settle on that maybe there's some room to talk here, then I think we can have an intelligent discussion.
That's fascinating. So when you look into the future and you're sitting in, I don't know, are you involved at all in the platform committees and the platform process?
Well, I'm blessed to have my state party chairman as chair of the subcommittee on
The answer
energy.
is a big yes. So in that, what kinds of things can we look forward to on energy and environment in the Republican
Sure.
Party
So
platform?
I think you can look for some policy very similar to what Mr. Trump talked about in Bismarck in his speech at the Wilson Basin Petroleum
Right.
Conference, especially as it relates to rolling back regulations, including the Clean Power Plan. I think you can look forward to some more states first energy policy. And I think you can also, getting back to America first, realizing we all know this is important to Mr. Trump, and when it comes to all of these global solutions, he comes right back to our country, that there's some, keeping an eye out for our global competitors, making sure that you know, nation-owned oil companies or state-owned oil companies or OPEC play by, if not the same rules as us, at least fair rules in the global marketplace, that there'll be some protection.
I want to go to the audience, but I mean, that's a big, big issue. I don't think most people realize that the largest firms in the world are state-owned
Yes.
oil companies. I see Terry Ferriello of ExxonMobil over here, for instance, but in that arena, what disadvantage, I mean, is it better off that our oil industry is private and all of theirs are state-owned, or are we at somehow a disadvantage that we have a very different ownership structure of our oil and energy assets?
Well, I think we can be disadvantaged certainly in the global marketplace, being private, not having the full power of a government behind us to either swamp a market or short a market to manipulate price and create monopolies. So I think that's a disadvantage, quite frankly. Now, keep in mind, I'm not one. Mr. Trump talks about energy independence. I tend to talk about energy security. I want to be able to buy cheaper oil from somebody else. I'm a consumer as well, and the United States is a consuming nation. I think it's good for the balance of trade to have that and keep that open. But as I like to say, being energy independent doesn't mean that you don't buy oil and gas from friends. It just means you don't have to if you didn't need to. And that's sort of again, that's similar to my agricultural background in North Dakota. Countries protect their food and energy supplies.
Would you guys reopen Keystone?
Yeah, pretty quickly, I think.
Pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Would that be energy move number one?
It would be one of the easier things to do because TransCanada seems to still want the pipeline.
Let me open the floor real quickly while we have a couple of minutes. Questions, comments? My friend at the you're not gonna give me a zinger. You promised me. Any other quick questions?
I already
back?
answered
Yeah?
his questions.
Okay, where's my Terry Ferriello? She has a comment or question. Yep, go ahead.
I have no questions for the Congressman right now.
Okay. Well, listen, I want to thank everybody. Thank you, Kevin.
got one right-
We got right here. Yes, right in the front.
Just had a quick question.
And we've got a microphone because millions of people are listening to every word of yours right now and live streaming.
I'm going to try not to.
They're just not drinking cocktails.
Yeah.
So I'm Jeremy Sigmund with the U.S.
Yes.
Green Building Council, and thank you for your remarks and your conversation just now. I didn't hear too much about the opportunity or the challenge that we're presented with related to efficiency and how that fits in with your views and
Great question.
with that of the party.
Sure.
So, yeah, where are you on efficiency?
So interestingly, efficiency, of course, one of the still potential victories this particular cycle or this term in Congress, as you know, is the energy infrastructure bill. Having been a regulator for 10 years, a rate regulator, my motto always was energy efficiency ought to be its own reward. By that I mean, I think helping energy efficiency along makes all the sense in the world. But I come from a low-cost energy state. And I also know that efficiency isn't always less expensive, at least to many of the ratepayers, as, say, for example, another form of low-cost energy production. So I always look for some type of a formula that demonstrates the largest reward for the largest number of ratepayers, because so many of our energy efficiency programs only help people that could afford the efficiencies in the first place, whether they be buildings, codes, windows, whatever, installation, whatever the case might be. So I'm pretty particular about it personally. That's not to say we shouldn't strive for it, but it ought to be its own
But just as a
economic
quick
reward.
follow-up here, do you see things like, when you talk to people in the oil and energy sector and people in efficiency and conservation and new technologies, that take us there,
Yes.
we're going to have a future that's just sort of completely retrofitted with sensors talking to
Really
one another.
smart
Is that something that someone like you and Mr. Trump embrace, or do you look at that as somehow bad?
No, I don't look at it as bad, and I don't know that he's thought a lot about it. I think that we can nerd out big time if we had 5 more minutes, but
We do.
won't. No, we don't. No, we won't nerd out. But But I think he's the kind of person that naturally would
Yeah.
embrace it. Yes,
Yeah.
I do. I think energy efficiency is a noble goal for every household. When it comes to government intrusion on it, then I put a little more scrutiny under it. Not to say that efficiency measures are bad. They're a wonderful negotiating tool when you're trying to build pipelines and transmission lines. You know, in politics, right? This art that we have to engage in.
Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Kevin Cramer,
Thank you.
the brain of Donald Trump in the energy sector.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for
My-
being with
my
us.
pleasure.
Great.
Thanks for the opportunity.
And I look forward to ribbing John Hoeven next time I see
Yes,
him about
yeah.
how many more votes
Why
he
he
gets.
needs a, yeah, that's right. Why does he need a partner?
Now, Bill Johnson.
Come on, Bill.
Come on up. Congressman Bill Johnson we're in your state of Ohio. Thank you so much for hosting us here. We're having like a speed dating round.
Yeah, and
Now-
I'm not very good.
yeah, now I hear, yeah,
these
you're-
chairs are tall. I can't get on this thing.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Did you hear very much of our conversation?
Yeah, I heard all
So
of that.
where was Kevin wrong?
I thought everything Kevin said was right on. It's hard to say anything negative about the points that he made. I think what excites me about this election and about where we're going with energy is that Republicans are telling the truth about where our energy profile is. We don't.
How would you describe that profile?
Well, I can tell you what it should be. Kevin talked about an all of the above energy profile. You're talking about oil and gas. You're talking about coal. You're talking about nuclear. You're talking about alternative forms of energies, but those need to be market-driven solutions, not mandated from Washington, D.C. Do we want to give incentives for companies and industries to develop some of those? But having Washington, D.C., bureaucrats in Washington that know nothing about the science of energy, they only know what they're being told, putting out policies that make it difficult for companies to move forward and for energy projects to move forward, like the Keystone XL pipeline, like the exporting of liquid natural gas. Those kinds of anti-energy policies coming out of Washington are difficult.
So help me understand the subsidy question and incentive question, because as I understand, because I hear it a lot, that when you lay out incentives and you're trying to provide support for solar and for wind and other forms, that they say these subsidies are terrible. But the natural gas and the oil industry, the fossil fuel sector, also have massive subsidies built into them. So would you remove all of those? How do you have that discussion in a fair way?
Well, I think the way you have that discussion in a fair way is you let the energy market drive the innovation. I am not against incentives for companies. You talked about energy efficiency.
Right.
I think that's an important part of our profile. And I'm certainly not against companies trying to pursue energy efficiency projects. But I don't believe that it ought to be mandated by Washington. I think it ought to be market-driven.
Now you've, as I understand it, have been very active in the LNG sector. LNG, and you've done legislation. Is Ohio a major gas producer? Major
Oh,
LNG
absolutely. The Marcellus and the Utica Shale, almost all of that. And the experts will tell you, and in deference to Kevin, where's Kevin at? Kevin, don't shout at me if you're out there. We've got more oil and gas under our feet in the Marcellus and the Utica Shale than almost anywhere in the world. And every day it seems like, and that's right here in Ohio along the Ohio River, Pennsylvania, West Virginia. And I can tell you, every single day it seems like there are experts that find out that there's even more of that resource down there.
So as I understand it, there are two major problems in that sector. One is that we have a lot of constraints on exports, that we don't export to any countries we don't have free trade pacts with, is one. So we don't export to Japan, for instance, LNG, which is fascinating me. And I think the second bit is about new investment dollars, that there are constraints on that. So can you take us down, because I'm very interested in how you get the LNG picture right. What would you and your colleagues do to change that picture?
Oh, that's a real easy one, and it makes not only economic sense, but it makes international and diplomatic sense. Right now, today, there are in excess of 30 LNG export permits that are languishing in the Energy Department that they simply have not moved on. Companies that are ready to start exporting liquid natural gas. In terms of investment, you would see the investment come because we've got allies all across the globe that would rather buy their energy resources from us than from places like Russia, OPEC, and other places. Take Russia, for example. Russia gets 50% of its revenue from taxes on oil and gas. 80% of that flows through pipelines that go across the Ukraine. 70% of it is sold to our friends and allies across Europe. And Vladimir Putin uses that as a hammer. If we were in the global LNG export market, we could affect Russia's economy to the tune of 30% if we were robust. Because we would very quickly, because of the amount of LNG that we have, we would very quickly rise to an important, if not the head of the table, where those LNG global markets are concerned. And our friends and allies and others across the globe would be coming to us. That's a job creator here at home. I've seen reports that says you're talking about 45,000 jobs, $6 billion in increased wage potential for American workers if we get into LNG exports on a big scale.
You know, when Marco Rubio was still running for president and was in the debates, he made more of a deal about climate change and the environment and whatnot than virtually any other candidate, and said that it would kill America's economy if we sort of imposed a carbon tax or we began sort of looking at climate change related remediation that would undermine. Do you share his views? Is that widely shared in the GOP, or is there a greater sensitivity to getting a balance between environment and energy issues now?
I share his concern. There is, but I don't necessarily buy into the idea that we throw out the baby with the bathwater. I can tell you that
The baby's the environment.
yeah, that's right. Well, no, the baby is the economy.
Okay.
The baby is the economy. You live along the Ohio River. Nobody cares more about the air that we breathe and the water that we drink than the people who live there. And the oil and gas companies and the coal mining companies that I'm associated with and that I know about, and I've not seen one that isn't, are very, very concerned. I've seen some of the reclamation work that the coal companies, for example, have done, and the way they leave the land when they finish it. It looks better than it did before they ever started. So we are environmentally conscious, but halting America's economy at the risk of carbon emission standards. Let me give you an example. I was in Europe in May of 2015, and we met with the head of the energy union there. And they have a motto called security of supply, because they have to get their energy sources from places like Russia. And as I said, Vladimir Putin uses that as leverage. They also have a goal to reduce carbon emissions by 40% by the year 2030. Now,
Right.
Keep in mind that our president signed us up, I think in error, to a 30% by the year 2030. So at the same time that Europe has that 40% goal by the year 2030, they're going back to a higher mix of coal in their energy profile. And I said, how are you going to achieve that 40% reduction doing it that way and going back to coal? And he said, Congressman Johnson, he said, it's a simple matter of economics. Our ratepayers, our businesses, our residential customers are simply no longer willing to pay the exorbitantly high prices that are required, because over the last 20 years, we've done what your president is now trying to do. I don't know why we have to learn this lesson all over again. Since the 80s, particulate matter has been reduced in our environment by 63%. That's from the EPA itself. We have made major strides in cleaning up our environment and preparing our environment so that it's safe for future generations. Why do we want to grind America's economy to a standstill?
Let me ask you
more.
a question that for years I've tried to understand the many different pieces of America's energy picture and how they fit together. Look at issues like efficiency, where these environmental trade-offs are, where the deals can be struck between them. And it reminds me of a schizophrenic, multiple personality problem, fighting with different groups, that it sort of defies organized logic, the this broad question when you kind of look at it. When I worked for Jeff Bingaman in the 1990s, it was something saying, why can't we come up with some sort of rational, energy policy? We had the state of New Mexico, which is, clearly a lot like North Dakota. We have just about everything. It's just, both. It was a mining and minerals and oil and energy state. We also had a very active Green Party movement. We had all the mixing for very toxic political mess. But what do you think needs to happen to actually help us step out of a dysfunctional debate on environment and energy into something a little bit more rational, where people get out of themselves, really understand where the others are, and begin to say, here's a way to get a better equation?
Well, I think one thing we need to do is calm down the rhetoric. It's highly politicized. A lot of the information that comes across the internet, that comes through the media, is only half true. And the American people are led to believe, like this idea that hydraulic fracturing, for example, contaminates the water table. Since 1960, I mean, we've been doing this for over 60 plus years, and we've had over 1 million hydraulic
How about the Oklahoma
fracturings.
earthquakes? I have property in Oklahoma.
Well, I don't live in Oklahoma.
Yeah,
I live
yeah.
along the Ohio River, and we hydraulic we fracture wells, and we produce a lot of oil and gas. Never once, and the former and the current EPA administrator have acknowledged that, and yet you still have these anti-fracking movements across the nation, and there's no science to it. It's just an alarmist tactic to get people to back away from fossil fuels. And it's not good for America. It's not good for our future economy.
When you in the GOP caucus, and just sort of forget the Democrats for a minute, but within your caucus, what's the sort of range of views on energy policy?
I think you have, within our conference, you have a tremendous positive, let's move the ball forward. That's why we have such a robust energy bill that has now passed the House and the Senate, and it's in conference, and we're optimistic. You're going to see a lot of streamlining pipeline permitting operations. You're going to see, hopefully, the Energy Department placed on a stop clock to get those LNG permits moving rather than just sitting there on them. And we're certainly hoping that we're going to be able to stop the president's shutting down of the coal industry, the stream protection rule.
Are you working with other states like Louisiana? Because I know
Oh, yeah.
Louisiana is having many of the same problems and same issues.
Absolutely. We're working across the spectrum.
And when you sit down, one of the things when you talk about Russia, I mean, Russia is now, for instance, offering the Japanese a pipeline, a gas pipeline, saying let's do a co-developed deal up through the northern islands down there, which is fairly strategically staggering that it's being discussed and on the table. But would you just open the door to LNG exports to Japan because they're a strategic ally and kind of let the other trade stuff go? What do you think needs to happen?
Let it be market driven. It certainly needs to be a part of the trade equation. Let it be market driven. And because you raise the issue of trade, we need trade policies, whether it's LNG, whether it's coal, whatever it is, and we are the world's largest producers of energy today. We're the leading producer, so we ought to be playing heavy in that market. But it ought to be trade policies that make American workers, put American workers in the driver's seat, and American workers have a level playing field, because when we have a level playing field, we win.
So I want to go to Terry Ferriello for her question in a moment, or anybody else's in just a second. But let me ask you.
I gave her the question earlier. when I was sitting over there.
In the GOP, do you think the GOP, because what you just said about trade to me sounds exactly like what I heard the president of the AFL-CIO saying a few years ago. That used to be the Democratic Party line on trade, that we wanted to sort of link it specifically to American jobs in that way. Has there been a shift?
No, and I don't know what the head of AFL-CIO says, but I can tell you what Bill Johnson says. What Bill Johnson says is, I hate the term free trade, because I think it is misrepresentative of the kind of trade policies that we're trying to get to. I'd much rather call these trade agreements export optimization agreements. We create it here, we build it here, we sell it there.
It'd be hard to tweet that often, export out to a lot of letters.
Well, you make an acronym
yeah.
out of it, So, but
EOAs.
yeah, But the policy needs to be, we build it here, make it here, sell it there. That's what creates jobs here at home. And there are things that we need overseas. And trade is also a leverage. You know, we got allies that need our help on many, many different fronts, and that we need their help. There needs to be a quid pro quo. But what we don't need is trade policies that the enforcement mechanisms are ignored, like this administration has ignored them, and it puts American workers at a disadvantage. And if Hillary Clinton comes in office, we're going to have more of that.
Fascinating conversation. Let me open the floor. Comments, questions? Terry. Oh, you do have a question. Can you hand her the mic?
Better use the microphone because I can't hear very well.
The microphone is not working.
Congressman, I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about the impact on jobs on your district. Talk a little bit more about the impact of the economy, growth, jobs. That
Oh,
energy sector.
absolutely.
Right.
The oil and gas
Can
industry.
you just describe for us what is your district in Ohio and say which part?
My district is almost a quarter of the state of Ohio geographically. It runs from about 45 minutes to an hour south of here, all along the Ohio River,
Right.
All the way down to the suburbs of Cincinnati, and as far west, 3/4 of the way to Columbus from the river. So it is a big, big district, and virtually all of the Marcellus and the Utica Shale are there. And since the Marcellus and the Utica Shale developments have begun, we've seen drops in unemployment of up to 66% in those counties that have shale development. That drop in unemployment is driving the unemployment down across our state. It's one of the biggest drivers of Ohio's job creation. You know, we've had a great run under Governor Kasich. We're like the 4th leading job creating state in the nation, number 1 in the Midwest, and that's because of all of the oil and gas. And take a look at what's happening down in Belmont County. We are sitting waiting, and it looks very good that we may get an ethane cracker plant in Belmont County. That is a $5 billion 5-year project, 10,000 construction workers, 1,000 permanent workers, and then that's just the tip of the iceberg. When the raw material, the ethylene, comes flowing out of that plant, the plastics and textile manufacturers that are going to replace the brownfield manufacturing sites all up and down the Ohio River. And we've got companies that come to us now saying, hey, do you know where we can find manufacturing space? Because they know that it's coming. And you'll see a resurgence of manufacturing and opportunity here in this region of the country. A region of the country, by the way, that is often at the back of everybody's mind in Washington, D.C.
So can I ask you, as that grows so manically and crazy and you got all these jobs coming in, is it smart growth? Are you looking at, because again, talking about environment and sustainability and, you know, where and how we live and efficiency, are you building that into the growth that's happening?
Absolutely, absolutely. The Ohio EPA, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, I hope under this next election, I'd nominate Craig Butler from the Ohio State EPA director. I hope they consider him to replace our current EPA administrator. He does a fantastic job. He is concerned about the environment. He manages the environment. He does that job well. And other states look at Ohio as a standard for how that work is done. They've managed the oil and gas industry in Ohio since 1965, and they've done a fantastic job of it.
Any other questions, comments? You winked at me. Yeah, I don't know. I saw it.
No winking.
You'd be paying at an auction. You would have just bought the deal. Let me just ask you, you know, finally on the energy picture. If we have this conversation 10 or 15 years from now, what do you think are the most important things we will have needed to achieve to get the energy picture right, to be good, to, you know, in a sense of, again, this balance between both sides? I mean, I often think sometimes when we have these discussions, we're really talking about the issues of yesterday, not the issues of tomorrow. So what will we really have needed to do?
We will have to get the unelected bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. to recognize that the strength of our nation is not in big government, it's not in overregulation, It's in the indomitable spirit, the heartbeat of the American people. That's where innovation comes from. And I could sit here, and we don't have another half an hour, but I could give you example after example after example.
If we give them another drink, they might. Yeah.
Well, all right. Rounds on me. Let's go. Let's keep talking. But I can tell you that right now today, federal regulations take about $2 trillion out of our economy. The Supreme Court has cited the EPA on the Clean Power Plan, the waters of the U.S., and now the BLM that is trying to overreach outside of their authorization to go after methane. We need them to stop. We need them to stop because businesses are under enough pressure. They need to be able to innovate. They need to be able to grow and hire and expand. Do it the right way. Let the state EPA and natural resources directors oversee that operation, because in Ohio we've been doing it well.
Are you going to Philadelphia convention?
I don't think they want me to.
Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Bill Johnson, thank you very, very much. And you can hang out and have a drink and continue the chat with all of our energy junkies here. So thank you so much. Thank you. That was great. Thank you. Oh, and I'm